Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Sorensen, and I am the Strategic IT Procurement Officer for the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. Welcome to Designing and Building a Cybersecurity Program. The overview today includes a brief introduction to the Midwestern Higher Education Compact as an organization and its contracting authority, highlights of the MHEC EiQ Master Price Agreement, a few words from Justin Pinnock, MHEC Account Manager for EiQ Networks, and finally our special guest, Information Security Lead at the University of Massachusetts. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation through the chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. To help you understand our contracting authority and why we even do this is to give you a better understanding about MHEC. We are an interstate compact charged with advancing Midwestern higher education through interstate cooperation and resource sharing. The Midwestern Higher Education Compact is one of 4 compacts in the nation, each having their own niche for addressing issues and advocating for higher education. Often referred to as MHEC, our niche has been in cost savings programs created by and supported by stakeholders from the 12 Midwestern states. MHEC has agreements to extend our technology contracts to the Southern Regional Education Board and to the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. It is our attempt to leverage the volume of our 12 member states and the compacts we are extending the contracts to. Currently, we have no agreement with the New England Board of Higher Education, and as the map shows, there are 3 states not covered by any of the compacts: New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. So you may be asking yourself, what is a compact? A compact really is a contract amongst the states. But because it's the states, it's actual legislation. MHEC, as well as the other compacts, have been statutorily created in each of the member states, and the statute makes the compact an instrumentality of state government in each of these member states. What makes the compact unique to higher education community is its broad contracting authority created in each of its member states. The compact is not a group purchasing organization. The compact is a means for stakeholders in the 12 member states to collaborate on identifying regional issues and committing resources to leverage the solution through the compact statutory authority. We are very selective in the types of contracts that we pursue. We try to identify those areas that we can bring value in, and as a result, will be something that an individual institution may not be able to replicate on its own. But because we are working together, we can bring value that wouldn't have otherwise been there. All the committees are volunteers who are experts in their respective areas of interest. For public entities, the compact provides alternatives to conducting an RFP or utilizing a contract vehicle more suitable for an executive branch of government. The compact statutory authority is focused on higher education needs. So, MHEC is like the Department of Administration for the state of Missouri, for example. But instead of being just like the Department of Administration for one state, we are a department of 12. To take it a step further, a compact really sits somewhere between the federal government and the state government in that the member states of the compact have actually ceded some of their sovereignty and autonomy to this entity called the compact, allowing the compact authority, in our case, to basically further higher education in our region. MHEC's Technologies Committee identified security event and information management as a need to address in the spring of 2011. The committee conducted a competitively sourced RFP and selected EiQ as the solution offering. MHEC and EiQ entered into a master price agreement in September of 2011. While all of our contracts are negotiated on behalf of higher education, when the opportunity presents itself, the compact negotiates to extend the contracts to K-12, cities, state, and local governments, which may include different price schedules. This contract with EiQ touches 41 states. Some resources we have available include our MHEC website, which features a couple of easy ways you may access our contracts. When accessing the site, mhtech.org, you may go directly to the category, computer, software, printers, for example, or you may go directly to the contract section. It's also important to note that we insert recent news about contracts, RFPs, as well as upcoming regional and national events. When selecting software, this takes us to the specific EiQ Networks page. On the page, you will note some of the contract highlights as well as EiQ's contact information. And on the right-hand side, you'll see contract eligibility. By clicking on the contract eligibility, you'll be redirected to EiQ's microsite, which will provide additional product information, pricing, and contact details. Clicking on the Contracts link in the upper right-hand corner, the green button, you will find the ability to download contracts and their amendments and or addendums. Plus, we also include the specific links to the state statutes for the MHEC region. While this was a brief overview of what's available to you from the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, I'd like to turn it over to Justin and introduce EiQ to you.
Thank you, Nathan. We'd like to thank MHEC as well as all the participants today and our special guest, Larry Wilson, who's been gracious enough to talk about how he's been building a security program to the webinar today. Just want to give you a quick introduction into EiQ Networks. We're based out of Boston, Massachusetts, and we're an IT security company providing both products and services to our customers. So we're helping a number of higher education customers, state and local, federal government, K-12, and enterprises with their security challenges, as well as any compliance challenges that they're facing. The way we've been doing this is the webinar today is about building a cybersecurity program. And to be effective in building an effective program, what you need is a delicate balance of three things. You need people, process, and technology. Now, the process you need is a set of best practices that are defined in the industry. You want a way to automate those best practices and get visibility into your network, as well as have someone manage this for you 24/7. But through a lot of the conversations that we have with our customers, a lot of our customers don't have the time, the money, or the resources to implement a program like this. So we've been working with a number of our customers to provide this. And the way we do it is by providing the process, the technology, and the people. Our process is based on the standards from the Council on Cybersecurity and SANS Critical Security Controls. So we take the security controls and do a continuous assessment across your network to make sure you're matching up, or see how well you're matching up those industry best practices. And we automate those through our tool, our technology called SecureView. And what makes our service unique is that the technology can be installed on-prem, so none of your sensitive data leaves the environment, or it can be installed in the cloud, depending on what your needs are. And then we have a team that will remotely monitor and manage your network for you. So if there's any areas of concern or any incidents, our team will go ahead and send you an alert with what information, what's happening, and how to remediate the specific issue. So that way you have an extension of your team, someone you can rely on in order to gain visibility into your network. So we become an extension of your security team. So you get that visibility into your network. And what we're doing today is we're going to talk, I'd like to introduce, so my contact information is here. If you'd like to have a further discussion around EiQ Networks, please feel free to contact me. But today what we're going to focus on is we have Larry Wilson, who is an EiQ customer. He's the ISO at the University of Massachusetts President's Office. He's been there. He's built out a great security program where he's actually won a few awards for his work. And he's going to go through about how he built that program and give you some details. So thanks again for joining us. So Larry, I'll go ahead and pass it to you.
Okay, thank you, Justin. And thank you to MHEC as well as everyone on the webinar. Today what I'm going to do is talk to you about the security program that we've implemented at University of Massachusetts. It's a consistent program that we've implemented across all 5 campuses as well as the President's Office. I work specifically at the President's Office, and my responsibility is to design the program and implement at the President's Office, but also help the different campuses in their implementation. You'll see on the first slide I have a picture of a factory. We've tried to automate as much as we can, and we have this concept called a controls factory, where we push the assets through the factory to make sure that they're protected or managed, and that's a key element of the program that I'll be talking about. The second thing I wanted to mention is this is also, 45 minutes is just too short to go into any depth on how you would actually build and roll out a program like this. So I have a training class. If anybody's interested, they can email me or email MHEC, and they can get a hold of it. This spends about 8 to 12 hours going in depth on exactly how this would work. So I'm going to cover an overview today. Hopefully it will be of value, and if you need additional information, please feel free to contact me. So what is the challenge? What are we trying to do? And I think Jane Hall-Lute from the Council on Cybersecurity, who is now responsible for the SANS 20 critical controls, really put it best in a presentation that she gave at a Gartner Security Conference this summer. She is challenging our corporate and government leaders to really, pick up their game on cybersecurity. This is a summary of her talk. There's a global awakening among technologists that we're vulnerable in cyberspace, not well organized to protect ourselves. Really, we suffer from a fog of war. There's more standards, more checklists, more devices, more things that we have to protect. And her challenge to corporate and government leaders is, where does your business stand on basic cybersecurity hygiene? And as I go through this presentation, folks on the webinar should be thinking of these 5 questions that Jane is actually traveling around the country asking our CEOs, our CIOs, and our CFOs. Do we know what's connected to our systems and networks? That's question number 1. Number 2, do we know what's running or trying to run on our systems and networks? Are we limiting the number of people with administrative permissions to change, bypass, or override the security settings? 4, do we have continuous processes backed by security technologies allow us to prevent most breaches, rapidly detect all that do succeed, and minimize damage to our business and customers? Really, this is focused on continuous monitoring, bullet number 4. And then finally, can you demonstrate this all to me, to our board, and to our shareholders and customers? Because having these basic safeguards in place will prevent 80 to 90% of the known attacks. And this is really the foundation of the program that we built at UMass, is to try to answer those 5 questions. Everybody who's involved with our program knows that this is what we're trying to do. We're working together to try to design, implement, and maintain a program that we can answer those 5 questions. So how do we respond to that challenge? Fundamentally, we need to be much more proactive. We have to first manage our risks, understand and establish a well-developed risk management model. Second, we have to manage our assets, because everything starts and ends with the assets. Those are the systems, the networks, the databases, the endpoints that we're charged to protect. Right? My role within the university is to make sure all of our assets are secure. Those being, whether it's an application, an endpoint, a server, a network, etc. Every single security incident starts with a compromised asset, and actually it ends with a compromised asset. So if we can manage our assets, that's really our best option to be more proactive. And then finally, alignment and transparency. Are we on the same page? Are we learning and improving? Are we testing and measuring? And are we maturing our program? to manage our risk, this is the fundamental risk equation, which has really been, I've been working in information security for 10 years, and every class that I've taught several classes over that time frame, always starts with this equation. What is it we're trying to do? We're trying to manage our risks. And really what contributes to risk are threats, vulnerabilities, and asset value. The higher the asset value, the higher the risk. And the only thing that really reduces our risk are controls or countermeasures that we put in place to mitigate the threats, mitigate the vulnerabilities, and protect our assets. And in cases where we have not put controls in place, we have residual risks that are currently unmitigated. And in some cases, we would accept those risks, and in other cases, we need to find a way to put controls in place to protect those assets and reduce the residual risk. Secondly, we need to manage our assets. We need to manage our risks. We need to manage our assets, because fundamentally, our managed assets are protected. They're secured against threats. We've eliminated or reduced the number of vulnerabilities that could be compromised through a threat. We've done that by implementing security controls, and therefore we have managed assets. Our unmanaged assets are not protected. Those are the assets that either, number one, they're unknown. In a lot of cases, this gets back to point number one on Jane's 5 questions. Do we know what's connected to our systems and networks? If we don't know what's connected, then we can't possibly manage those, right? So either they're an unknown asset, which by definition is unmanaged, or they are a known asset, but they do not contain the appropriate level of security controls, and therefore they continue to be an unmanaged asset. Again, our goal is to put as many assets as we can into the managed side of the equation, and as few as possible on the unmanaged side. Whoops, sorry. So here's the controls factory, and here's the next step in alignment and transparency. This diagram is well known by everybody within the IT organization at the university. It really talks through the process that Jason mentioned about going from an unmanaged asset state to a managed asset state. We start with a threat model. We need to understand what are the threats against our organization, threats, vulnerabilities, consequences. What does a typical cyber attack look like? And then we want to model those cyber attacks, come up with some sort of a tool or a program that allow us to model cyber attacks. If we can do that, then we have a better understanding of what the major threats are to our environment. Inside the wall, if you will, inside the factory, we really do two things. Our IT organization is really fundamentally responsible for two things: designing the controls and implementing the controls. Designing the controls really is the knowledge to put together a strong security program that will ultimately protect our critical assets. Starts with the controls framework and standards. We specifically use the NIST Cybersecurity framework, also called the C3 framework. I'll talk through briefly what some of those components are. And then we have a model that we look at on how to model the cybersecurity controls. That's the knowing part. Inside the factory, there's the knowing what to do, and then there's the actual doing, right, which is the implementation of the controls. Knowing is not necessarily doing. You have to do both. And I think a lot of organizations tend to know what to do, but the act of carrying it out and actually implementing, actually doing it is where they fall down. So that's the controls implementation side. We automate our controls, just as Justin mentioned earlier, through vendor technologies and services. These tools and technologies allow us to automate the controls to make sure that they're consistently applied, number one, and secondly, continually applied, so that 24/7 by 365 we have those controls in place. Those technologies are organized into security programs and projects, just like any other IT program or project that you might have within your organization. And then finally, they're packaged as a service, security as a service, managed security service. And that's where I'll talk a little bit about a couple of the EiQ services that are part of the MHEC contract. Finally, on the other side of the wall is the controls testing, because this is probably an area that's weakest in most organizations. How do you know for sure that your controls are always in place and effective? Well, the only way you can do that is to test them. You need to come up with some sort of a testing guideline, testing techniques, and then assessment procedures. We do test periodically through audits, but we really need a more automated, more frequent testing procedures and guidelines. And then the output of our controls factory is our managed assets. Those are the protected assets. By going through this threat model, controls design, controls implementation, controls testing across all of our assets, we've really gone from an unmanaged state to a managed state. And at the bottom you can see the 8 different asset groups that we have identified within the university. Asset group number 1 are the endpoint devices. Number 2 are applications. Number 3, networks. Number 4, data center systems. Number 5, databases. Number 6 and 7 are more how our IT organization supports the business. The business is really responsible for the identity and access governance, because really it's the users and their identities that are managed more by the business than by IT. Same with the data. The data belongs to the business. And then finally, we have our monitoring and response center, where we do real-time 24/7 monitoring. Now, these assets are designed this way because this is the way we're organized. Our endpoint manager or our desktop manager is responsible for desktop security. Our applications managers, for the different applications within the university, are also responsible for application security. Our network manager is responsible for network security, on and on down the line, because that gives us a force multiplier of so every single IT employee has security as part of their responsibility. My role is to design the factory, put the controls in place, figure out a way how to do the testing and the threat modeling, but ultimately the day-to-day operation of the security controls is really the responsibility of the IT department, as well as the business in the area of data governance and identity governance. Now, the final, I'm speaking for a few minutes around this diagram because it is really the elevator pitch for our program. We're really looking to go from a current state, which is the as-is risk environment, where we have a pretty significant mix of unmanaged and managed assets, to a desired state where we would have absolutely more managed assets and fewer unmanaged assets. This is really part of our overall risk management framework. The current state would be looking at the current risk environment, and the desired state would be looking at the future risk environment. So I'm going to go through each part of this controls factories for the remainder of this presentation, starting with the threat model, where we look at threats, vulnerabilities, consequences, the cyber attack chain, and then modeling cyber attacks. There is a lot of documentation out there by all kinds of vendors on threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences. It's not hard to find these documents. So there's plenty of material that you can look through that will help you identify what are the major threats. Here I've included a couple documents, one by Trend Micro, one by Price Waterhouse. Likewise, there are many, many documents on vulnerabilities. And then the two major documents I found on consequences, really the Verizon data breach report, as well as the McAfee estimating the global cost of cybercrime. Really, the consequences are cost and breaches. But this is really the reason we're doing these programs, because there are threats, there are vulnerabilities, and more importantly, there are consequences. Most cyber attacks follow this pattern. Certainly the Target data breach was mapped to this particular cyber attack chain. A Senate report that was published in March showed specifically how there were 4 different places within the Target infrastructure where this data breach could have been caught, right? From reconnaissance to phishing, to infiltration, to backdoor, lateral movement, data collection, and exfiltrate. These are the 7 major steps of a typical cyber incident. And so this is important because if we know how attacks occur, then we have a better chance of defending ourselves against these attacks. We put controls in place at each stage of the cyber attack chain. So modeling cyber attacks, there are a few modeling processes out there. One is called Stride from Microsoft. It's a little bit older. This one that we use is called PASTA. It's basically looking at how you would set up a model to better understand, what a cyber attack might look like. Define the objectives, define the technical scope. Step number 3 is really important, to decompose the application. Understanding exactly how the application works is critical in order to be able to put the controls in place at each stage of the application in order to protect that against these threats. Step 4 is doing different types of analysis on threats. Step 5, looking at the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses within your environment, attack modeling, and then doing a risk assessment. So that's kind of the threat area of the controls factory. These, again, the threats are what we're trying to protect ourselves against. Moving on now, I go into the place where I spend most of my time is in the controls design. Controls frameworks and standards, the NIST cybersecurity framework, also called the C3 framework. This NIST framework was only published in February of this year, February of 2012. And then finally, we'll talk about a cybersecurity controls model. So here's the 3 major frameworks that we use at UMass. We use NIST as sort of an overarching framework because it has the 5 critical steps that somewhat align or very closely align with the attack chain, right? So we've mapped these 5 steps to the 5 questions actually from Jane Hall Lute to make sure that if we do build a program based on these 5 categories, if you will, that we will not only be able to answer the questions that are most important to our executives, but also we're aligning against the attack chain, the 7-step cyber attack chain. So the 5 functions are identify, which is all about discovering and assessing your assets. Second is protect, which is most of the controls actually fit in the protect area. Defenses against attacks are the protect. The third area is detect, and that is if in fact an attack gets through, you're able to detect it quickly so that you can remediate that attack. The next is respond, and the 5th is recover. So what NIST has done in their cybersecurity framework, they've taken the controls that are listed below, the Council on Cybersecurity Critical Security Controls, as well as the ISO 27002 controls, and mapped them against each of these 5 areas: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And as I mentioned before, there are a large number of controls in the identify area, which is basically making sure that you have a good, solid inventory of your assets and their configurations and what software is running on your network. Protect is things that allow us to defend our network, like monitoring privileged accounts, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for through vulnerability scanning, anything malware detection, things like that fit in the protect category. The detect is all about SIM monitoring, security event management, 24/7 by 365 monitoring, and again, respond and recover. But in the NIST framework, they've mapped the SANS 20 critical security controls as well as the ISO 2013 controls into those different categories. Now, the reason we've chosen a combination of the critical security controls as well as the ISO control is because we want to cover what Jason had talked about earlier: people, the process, and the technology. The SANS critical security controls, I call them SANS. It was SANS up until a year ago when it became Council on Cybersecurity. But those 20 critical controls are really technology-focused controls. You'll see that in a poster that they put together by SANS. these controls really focus on technology. Whereas the ISO controls are more about process and about management, which is more the people side. You know, how to set up a security program, do risk assessments, governance, et cetera, are all management type compliance initiatives, all management type controls, as well as some of the operational access controls, application development controls. Those are more process type controls. So we felt as a comprehensive security program, we needed to include technical, process-based controls as well as management controls to cover the people, the process, and the technology. Okay, finally, modeling cybersecurity controls. How do we build a model that takes these controls and actually kind of packages them in a easily understood and repeatable model that folks can understand? So I came up with this as a managed asset model. You start with unmanaged assets. It's kind of going back to the left-hand side of our controls framework. Then we have to, again, the goal is to take these unmanaged assets and make them managed assets. So we start with a set of unmanaged assets. Then I looked at all the different technologies and services that map to the 20 critical controls, and they really do three things. They scan, they monitor, and they filter. Through those three different techniques, you're able to discover these assets that were not known, and now they've become known assets, right? They're not managed yet, but they're known assets. And again, as I mentioned before, you can't manage an asset until you first know it. So now I have a combination of unmanaged assets that used to be some were known and some were unknown. But by doing these scanning, monitoring, and filtering, I'm able to take all of my assets, unmanaged assets, and at least they're all known. Once I have a known asset, I can apply those three security controls: general computer controls, which are the process controls; cybersecurity controls, which are the technical controls; and the management and communications controls, which are the people-focused controls or the management controls. Once those three sets of controls are applied to our unmanaged assets, now we have what we're looking for, which are managed assets, right? And that's ultimately the goal. That's about all we can do. Once we have all of our known assets, which are a comprehensive list of our assets, and they become managed, that's really the goal of the program. On the left, you'll see a yellow box. That's our asset governance function. And really, that has to do with, you know, adding assets, removing assets, reconciling assets, and then monitoring assets. You know, that's more of a monitoring or a console. Think of it as like a console access to a system, like to your firewalls, et cetera, but it allows you to get visibility into the unmanaged as well as the managed assets. So that's the model that we've used for building out our cybersecurity program. And unfortunately, these two slides were out of order. I apologize for that. This was how we've going back 2 slides. This is how we've actually mapped the critical security controls and the ISO controls back to the 4 or the 5 major activities within the SANS framework. And then, you know, getting back to the controls model, I apologize again for that one slide that was out of order. Here's kind of the process around how we go from a set of unmanaged assets to a set of managed assets. Step 1, establish a system of record. 2, update with known assets. 3, scan for unknown assets. 4, monitor for unknown assets. 5, filter for unknown assets. 6, update the system of record with the known but unmanaged assets. 7, apply the security controls, the general computer controls, the cybersecurity controls, the management and communications controls, and then generate real-time alerts and management reports through the console, and then you update your system of record with managed assets, and you just continuously repeat that process. I mean, this is, I have a team of 3 people who work for me, and this is what they do, right? They're continuously looking for assets that are unmanaged, applying the controls to those assets, notifying people when there's vulnerabilities so that we need to remediate the vulnerabilities, looking for, suspicious IPs on the internet through threat intelligence sources, but continuously looking to ensure that, number one, we know what all our assets are, and then secondly, for all those assets, we ensure that they become managed assets. Okay, so that's the knowing, that's the plan, that's what we're trying to do. The next step is the actual doing, right? And that's the controls implementation phase of the program. Really automating the controls is, that's why we purchase technologies, that's why we buy managed services, to automate the controls that we just talked about. We package those into programs and projects and ultimately deliver security as a service for the university. These are some of the major technologies, or most of the major technologies we have within our security area. EiQ is one of our major partners. Our SIM is an EiQ SIM, and we have co-managed services working with EiQ. But these are some of the other technologies and services. Now, the reason I've labeled these this way is I've taken those 8 security programs and I've mapped each of these technologies to each of those 8 programs to make sure I have good coverage in each of those 8 areas. And remember, those programs, which I'll talk about in a minute on the next slide, are the asset groups that we're trying to protect. But every one of these technologies is being specifically used to manage one or more areas of those asset groups, right? It could be just endpoint, but it could be endpoint plus network plus systems. So the different technologies that I have here are all mapped against the different projects or programs that we're implementing. And this is, again, the list of those programs. Each of those, we've talked about these earlier as the assets that we're trying to manage. Those assets are collected into 8 different programs. Program number 1 being endpoint, number 2 being application. So I would go back one slide, for example, check off all of these technologies that would be used within program number 1, which is endpoint, move it over to this slide and just list those in the endpoint security program. Not only do I list them in the program, but I also organize them based on the NIST framework. Are they technologies that help us identify our assets? Are they technologies that help us protect, detect, respond, or recover? So I've mapped them both to the programs as well as to the controls frameworks and the controls categories. That's really how we've taken the design that we talked about earlier and actually putting it into implementation. Finally, we package these as security as a service offerings. There's really 4 options, and we're depending on which application or which area, we use some of each. Option number 1 is build it yourself, build your own security operations center. We do some functions here at the university that we don't outsource. There's certain areas that we have a monitoring team that takes care of those areas within the university. Option 2 is fully outsourced, and there are places where we do fully outsourcing in security areas. EiQ has a service specifically called SOCView, which Justin spoke about earlier, that's focused on the fully outsourced area. The third area is or option is a co-managed cybersecurity service. That is, where we're partners. For example, EiQ offers a co-managed service as well, where we might manage the security offerings, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and nights and weekends, the EiQ team would take over the monitoring and the management of the security offerings. And then option number 4, which is is certainly a hybrid of 1, 2, and 3. You can mix and match, and whatever fits best within your organization. But ultimately, what we need to do is, in order to provide 24/7 by 365 coverage, we need to package these programs into services and define these as security as a service. The last part of the controls factory is the testing piece. What are some of the testing guidelines, testing techniques, assessment procedures that we might use? There are several testing guidelines out there. Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual is probably the most complete. That's the document that we're looking at right now as sort of our lead document in how we're doing our testing. Again, it's extremely important that you do test these security controls. There is no way to know whether or not your security program is functioning and your controls are effective unless you test them. This is something that is oftentimes overlooked, and it can lead to big problems because you don't know for sure if everything's working unless you do go out and test. These are 6 different documents that talk about testing. Besides the Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual, I want to point out the one in the middle on the bottom, the Critical Infrastructure Security Analysis, or CRISALIS. This is a testing plan that was really being funded by the government, which is using a combination of higher ed, industry, and government to put together a comprehensive test plan focused on critical infrastructure. I mean, if you think about why is it important to test, a security breach at UMass would result in the loss of confidential information. Could be a sensitive information such as social security numbers, credit card numbers, research data, etc. Not critical to human life, but a security incident within our critical infrastructure, such as our energy grid or our nuclear facilities, etc., has a much bigger impact. So it's extremely important that we do testing and validation within the critical infrastructure industry, and therefore this program has been put together by the government, higher education, as well as industry to put together a comprehensive security program or testing program that could be used in critical infrastructure. Right now, work is still in progress. The report is due out in March of 2015 as to the results of the assessment that's being done there. Second is testing techniques. 3 very common techniques are black box testing, gray box testing, white box testing. Black box testing is really more of your traditional pen testing, where the inner workings of an application are not known. But you hire an experienced pen tester, or you develop your own testers to test your applications, your infrastructures, really anything that could be vulnerable to a externally based cyber attack. And that testing procedure, again, aligns very closely with the cyber attack chain. Gray box testing is a form of black box testing, but some information is known. Right? Some information is supplied to the tester, so that it kind of replicates somebody who is phished or somebody who had social engineering, where some information has been given up and the testing proceeds from there. And then finally, the white box testing is probably the fullest amount of testing. Code reviews, dynamic and static testing are examples of white box testing, where the information is known about the inner workings of the applications, the infrastructure, etc. But very detailed algorithmic testing, like running scripts, etc., are conducted against your internal applications, or not internal, but against your applications and infrastructure. So these are 3 different types of tests that really need to be performed in order to validate that your security controls are not only in place, but they're effective. And finally, there's controls assessments. Controls assessments are really your independent audits that could either be through your internal audit organization, an external audit association, your compliance reviews if you're subject to PCI or Sarbanes-Oxley or any of the other regulations. These usually follow a set of steps that defined like this: scoping analysis, what's in scope versus what's out of scope, document the significant business processes and the controls, evaluate the design of the controls. Just like we talked about the design of the controls, your independent auditor is going to want to evaluate the design of the controls, test the operational effectiveness of the key controls, remediate any exceptions, and then perform year-end activities. Now again, the difference between these assessments and continuous testing through black box, gray box, or white box testing is these are really only generally performed once a year. So they really don't give you they give you an indication of how well you've designed and implemented your security controls, but they really, since they're only once a year, it's sort of it's not a great view as to where you are day to day, because really, obviously, we need to provide these protections all the time, not just once a year. We need to build a testing center where we can test each area, test the endpoints, test the applications, test the network, test the data center systems, the databases, the identity, and the data, as well as our monitoring and response center. Very, very specific, very, very detailed, very, very structured set of tests that we should be conducting continuously. And that's really it for the controls factory. Those are the four main components. Here I've just mapped them so you can see from the beginning till the end what we do, starting with the phases of an attack, before, during, and after, how the attack chain aligns with those phases. Then there's the wall that comes into our controls area, the NIST controls framework, identify, detect, respond, recover, our control standards, ISO 27000, as well as the Council on Cybersecurity, our technologies and services that automate the controls, our programs and projects which organize those technologies and those controls into our departments, who are, again, incorporating information security controls as part of their day-to-day operation. That's inside the walls of our controls factory. And then we do testing, right? Cybersecurity testing guidelines, techniques, procedures, and establish a testing center that we can continuously test to make sure that these controls are always in place and effective. All of that information is fed into that overall risk model, the fair risk model, so that we can really come up with two pieces of key information. What is the loss event frequency and what is the loss magnitude? In other words, how often is there a compromise, or we can predict a compromise, and what is the magnitude of that compromise? Those are the two risk values we're looking for through this fair risk model. And everything else underneath you see as part of what we've already talked about: threats, vulnerabilities, controls, assets, etc. So in summary, this is kind of what we're looking to do. By implementing this security program, we're hoping to be able to advise our executives where we stand on basic cybersecurity hygiene. And we're able to do this in all 8 areas, not just, in other words, question number 1, do we know what's connected to our systems and networks? The answer is yes, but it's not just the endpoints, it's the endpoints, it's the servers, it's the databases, it's the applications, etc. So it's not, that question is quite broad, but in order to answer that question, we have to understand and know what our assets are for each of those 8 different categories, right? Do we know what's running or trying to run on our systems and networks? Are we limiting the number of people with administrative privileges? All those, again, for each of those 8 different asset groups. Do we have continuous processes backed by security technologies, allow us to prevent most breaches, detect and that do succeed, and minimize damage? Again, following that NIST framework, we're able to do exactly that. Prevent most breaches by knowing, questions 1, 2, and 3, knowing what's connected, knowing what's running, and knowing who has privileges. We can prevent most breaches, and then secondly, rapidly detect those that do get through. And can we demonstrate it? We need to demonstrate it to me, which was Jane, right, as she talks to our CIOs, CFOs, etc., to the board and to the shareholders. And the only way you can really demonstrate that you have items 1 through 4 in place is through some sort of testing and reporting on the results of those tests. So that's it. That's a high-level summary of the security program that we've implemented at University of Massachusetts. I have many more details in the course that I teach at Secure World. If anybody would like to get more information, please feel free to contact me. I think that my contact information is available within this slide presentation deck. So if there are any questions, I'll take a look. I'll take a look at the chat room. One question that did come through: does a controls-based program make sense for a smaller organization? And that is an excellent question. I've heard many times that UMass is a pretty large organization, so you can afford to have a large IT staff, multiple folks dedicated to security, etc. I work for a smaller organization, so I'll answer that in two ways, right? Question number one is, if you're a small organization, you have fewer assets, right? That's why you're small. So if you have fewer assets, you have fewer controls. I mean, you still have the same number of controls, but they're applied to fewer assets. So ultimately, you have fewer controls. So yeah, it's just as important to protect those assets if they're of any value, right? That's really what it comes down to. Are those assets of any value? So I think this program would also apply to small organizations. The second way I answer that question is we formed a consortium up here in New England of all the state colleges in Massachusetts, private colleges in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and we're now bringing in Connecticut, and we're all following this same program. So again, we're collaborating with different higher ed institutions, and we're all using exactly the same model across all of higher ed. So that's another way we're a smaller organization. We may not have the resources to go in and design this and build this, but still have IT operations responsibility. And if you remember what I said, if you have IT operations responsibility, then you are also responsible for security as well as everything else with IT operations. Time for one more question or a couple questions. Can you talk about encryption and moving data off network? Do you do this at all? And the answer is yes. When the application requires it, we do this. Perfect example of credit cards, right? Of course, we have to process credit cards. We have 300 different locations, and that's the data part of our program, and we certainly do encrypt that data at rest, in transit, as well as in use. Okay, another excellent question. How do you sell your senior management team on the need for a security program without having been breached before? That's once again a very, very good question. That's hard. That's honestly hard to do. I started working at UMass 5 years ago just after a major data breach, and typically that's when people start to get interested in security, is after a data breach. But I always, when I give this presentation, or this training, I usually talk about the fact that you really have two choices, right? In Massachusetts, you have to have a security program because it's the law. Mass privacy law says every corporation who collects and retains information about citizens from Massachusetts has to have a written information security program in place and running. So that's one reason you can, and that really was effective in getting a lot of organizations up and running. And there have been companies fined because they did not have a security program in place, and they were breached. So that's one reason. There's the penalties that apply if you don't have a program. Secondly, I think what's going to happen, and I hope Jane Lute is successful in her sort of march across America here, really promoting the fact that this is really important, that executives need to know these answers to these 5 questions. I think most executives want to have a security program in place. They want to have good governance over the information that they're collecting, but they don't necessarily know how. And I think educating on you can actually do this through a program like this, I think helps as well. A couple more questions. How does this model work effectively for the academic teaching proportion of CSIT compared to college-wide classes? More openness in the classroom, lockdown elsewhere. Yeah, and I think where you need to do is you need to focus this program on the critical resources. Our student networks are connected directly to the internet. They don't touch our administrative networks, so that we've totally segmented those so that we don't run the risk of having an unprotected network connect, or an untrusted network connect directly to our our network and our systems and applications that contain the sensitive data. So we've really taken a lot of time and effort and energy in making sure we segment those networks. And again, the student network, if there is no sensitive data on the student network, which there should not be, it's not like the administrative network, we don't have to have as many security controls in place. Next question, does EiQ offer the hybrid approach to security monitoring? Justin, maybe you could take a crack at that question.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Yes, we do offer the hybrid approach. The way that we do it is that you would actually install our software on your network, so none of your sensitive data leaves the environment, and we have a virtual SOC team that would manage the EiQ solution and baseline your network and also alert you on any events that you should pay attention to, provide daily reports, do the continuous security assessment against the SANS controls, which Larry had mentioned in his presentation there. So we become, and the benefit is that you get to use the solution when you're in the office, you build your own reports, you can look at your own data, nothing's going to leave it, but then you have our team that can help you out and become an extension of your team.
And one more question, Justin. For small IT teams, would you recommend the hybrid approach? Is it affordable? Well, I can start with that, and the answer is absolutely. That's very important for small IT teams because you're not going to have two reasons. Number one, you're not going to have 24/7 by 365 coverage if you're a small IT team. And then secondly, the expertise at EiQ is going to be stronger than what you could put together yourself. They're very skilled, they're trained, they look at this information for many customers. So they're going to be able to not only help you monitor and manage the events that occur within your environment, but also advise you on best practices to set this up, based on some of the other customers that they have. You can probably add to that, Justin, as well.
Now, Larry, I think that was a very, very good answer. You're exactly right. We built this solution for small to medium enterprises as well as larger enterprises, but we do bring that expertise and the product expertise as well, so you don't have to go and learn a new product. We are able to go ahead and from day one start giving you value out of the solution.
I think I have time for one more question, which is another excellent question. How do you push the controls defined in the security program to faculty that feel the controls are too limiting to them and who feel they don't need them? This is an excellent, excellent question. I hear it all the time in academia. And before I answer that, I want to tell you a little bit about my background. I started out in security at EMC. EMC is a high-tech company up here in Massachusetts. Everybody has EMC storage. I then went to State Street, where I worked with stockbrokers, et cetera. And then I came to higher ed, where we have faculty. The fact that we have faculty is not unique. So they were, sort of, I can't think of the right word, but folks who felt the rules didn't apply to them in engineering areas, the top engineers. There are that same kinds of folks in financial services, the top, stockbrokers, and then same idea with the faculty, the top faculty. What's really, really important is that this program is implemented consistently. You cannot make exceptions. Now, you don't want to use the bully approach, or fear, but you do need to figure out a way to, either through the management, top down, or working directly with the individuals, that we can have strong security controls without having a major impact on operations. You cannot avoid, if faculty have sensitive data, which a lot of them do, a lot of their research is very sensitive. It is covered under government contracts in a lot of cases. You need to protect that information. So excellent question. It's not easy. It's more people skills than technical skills, but ultimately what's really important is that the rules do need to apply to everyone. So I think that's everything that I see.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. That was very informative, and appreciate you answering our participants' questions. Looks like we have one more question about your contact information. I believe we have a slide containing that. And thank you to EiQ, Justin, for your introduction. And in closing, we've included MHEC contact information, so you can see my information is included as well as our general counsel if you have any questions directly for Rob. Well, thank you very much, Justin and Larry, and we appreciate your time today.